Shalom, everyone. This is Sade, and I'm coming to you with some little information that I ran across. I'm reading three books. One of the books is called Ouida, A Social History of a West African Slave Port between 1727 and 1892. The second one I have is called Creole New Orleans, and the third one is called The Airway People, a study of the Airway people in Burma, Togo. And then if you notice, I have a map here. So I'm going to try to tie these books with the areas of the Jews in these locations on this map. There was colonies all over Africa, near the Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and the Slave Coast. So let me start with the first book, and that book is going to be Creole New Orleans, and I'm starting from page 67. So um, it says there was only a handful of black slaves in the Louisiana before the first slave trading ship arrived from Africa in 1719. Okay, so this is some history about Louisiana, how they were transported over to Louisiana back and forth and coming from the different trading posts in Africa and bringing them over to Louisiana and West Indies and all these other places. It says there was only a handful of black slaves in the Louisiana before the first slave trading ship arrived from Africa in 1719, the year after New Orleans was founded, between 1719 and 1731. It says 22 of the 23 slave trading ships that came from Africa while France ruled Louisiana arrived between June 1719 and January 1731. It says 16 slave trading ships arrived in Louisiana from the Senegal region. And here's the Senegal region. Senegambia. This is the area they're talking about. So they're saying that 16 slave trading ships arrived in Louisiana from the Senegal region. Okay. 6 ships from Judah. 6 ships came from Judah, or Whydah, Whydah, a slave trading post on the Gulf of Benin near Dahomey. Here's down here, Dahomey. This is near Dahomey. Senegambia, Dahomey, Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and then here is Slave Coast. This is where these ships went to pick up our people from these areas, and these was Jewish colonies. It says here Jewish traces, Dahomey Jews. It says in Senegambia, Judeo paganism. Up here, Lam Lam, once a Jewish colony, and here's Timbuktu. But let's go back down here to right now it's talking about Senegal and Dahomey, which is down here. It says in one from Cambinda, Angola. Now I'm not going to try to go up in this. I'll try to find that later. It says during the same period. But we know that they all are the same area, the Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and the West, and the Slave Coast. It's the slaves trade from Senegambia, intensified after 1725. Between February 1725, I'm looking at Dahomey, and January 1731, 12 slave ships from Senegal landed 3,259 slaves at Belize at the mouth of the Mississippi River. So it took them from Senegal and Dahomey took them across the water to the United States, and landed on the mouth of the Mississippi River. It says during the same period, one ship from Judah landed in Mississippi, 464 slaves at the same port. Told me to look at see figure 2. It says slave landed in Louisiana by French slave trade numbers and origin. Senegal, Bight of Benin, and Congo and Gongola. So these are the different places on the coast of Africa where there were Judaism practice, where there was colonies, and all these places. Shows here was a Jewish trace, the Ashanti, Sierra Leone, Liberia. I'm going to also show you Nigeria. Here's Nigeria right here. See what it says Nigeria? This is Nigeria. West Africa. So it says, I don't know how they read this chart here, but it has Senegambia, Bight of Benin, Congo/Angola. So that's where they went to coast on that coastline. It says, let me go ahead and continue to read. Yeah, 464 stay at the same port. It says the only other slaves trading ship that came from Africa to Louisiana while the colony was under French rule arrived in 1743 and was from Senegal. Wow. It says the African nations represented among the slaves, as well as the pattern of introducing them into New Orleans, contrast sharply with those of the Anglophone United States. It says the African slaves brought to the Chesapeake during the 18th century came mainly from the Bight of Biafra and were heavily Igbos, Ibibos, Ibibio, Efkin, Efkan, Efkin, and Moko, Moko, with a significant minority from Angola. Between 1735, let me go back up here. Where's Tamar? Let me go back over here to where am I? I think I'm going back too far up. Go back up here. One shows the Gold Coast and the homie. We'll go a little further down. Yeah. The homie here, Gambia here, and then right beneath that, we're talking about the Gold Coast. This is where they went. This is the area where they went to get everybody. It's the line of the Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and the Slave Coast. It said between 1735 and 1740, 70% of the Africans brought to South Carolina came from Angola. Between 1717 and 1767, 22% came from Angola and only 5% from Gambia. Although these figures are uncertain because the origin of the 61% of the slaves was listed simply as Africa. So they listed as Africa, but didn't give the name of the tribes or the area. With 8% from Guinea. Now we know that Guinea had us there too because they were taken from shipped over from Portugal to South Guinea. It goes on to say that Margaret Washington Cree concludes that the Senegambia and the Windward Coast provided 61% of the slaves entering into Charleston from Africa for almost 40 years. Wow. Yo, they did this for 40 years. Can you imagine how many of our people was taken within that time period? It says from 1749 through 1787. Wow. It says the proportion coming from Angola dropped to 11%. It says Senegambia dropping to 7.5% slave from the Gold Coast. Again, excuse me, Senegambia, we know there was Jewish colonies there because all across this map. And then it says here that from Senegambia, dropping 7.5% slaves from the Gold Coast. And here we are at the Gold Coast right here. And since Senegambia was above here. Um, from the Gold Coast remained a substantial minority and fluctuating between 13.3 and 17.2% between 1749 and 1807. Almost none came from the Bight of Benin during that period. It says two-thirds of the slaves brought to Louisiana under French rule came from Senegambia. So French was over there taking us too. Or they was taking us to French, and French in return, I guess, um, sent us to where it says two-thirds of the slaves brought to Louisiana under French rule, right, came from Senegambia, and they included a strong influences continuous of Bambara. The French slave trade to Louisiana focused on the Senegambia and specifically Bambara because in 1720 the Company of the Indies, West Indies, was given administrative control and a trade monopoly in both Louisiana and Senegambia. The Senegal concession was the only place on the African coast. African coast, remember, African coast, where slave coast, Ivory Coast is an African coast, slave coast, where the company held exclusive trading rights. Lord have mercy, these some wicked folks. They just, oh my goodness. Anyways, and they don't think they're gonna have to answer to the Most High for what they've done. It is elsewhere, is sold private permits to engage in the slave trade. It said the English had taken Gambinda, and the English and the Portuguese dominated the entire coast of Angola. It says the French had little hope of trading in Angola except with a great difficulty. Although the Company of the Indies had a trading post at Judah, so these trading posts, they took them from this area and then took them to the post called Judah because it says trading post at Judah, Gulf of Benin. It says there it competed with all the nations of Europe. The Portuguese was taking the upper hand of Judah. The kings of Adris, Alada, or Porto Nova were hostile to the European, interrupting trade. So he must have been fighting back because it says, I'm going to read that again. It says, although the Company of the Indies had a trading post at Judah, which is Gulf of Benin, there it competed with all the nations of Europe, the Indies did, the West Indies. But it says the Portuguese was taking the upper hand at Judah. The kings of Andres, Alada, or Porto Novo were hostile to the European and interrupted trade of the Portuguese. The slave trade at Judah was becoming an uncertain, unprofitable. Okay, so it's talking about the king of the Portuguese. It says, I'm going to say, it says the most important kingdom of Senegambia maintained a tight control over which people could be enslaved and sold to European. Wow, let me read that again. The most important kingdoms of Senegambia maintained a tight control over which people could be enslaved and sold to the Europeans. So that means that Africa had a hand in our enslavement, because what they were doing is when it says that the most important kingdoms of Senegambia maintained a tight control over which peoples could be slaves, then that tells me there was a different set of people. There was a Hamitic people and Semitic people, and they were selling the Hamitic people was selling the Semitic people, and that's what it sounds like. The most important kingdoms of Senegambia maintained a tight control over which people could be enslaved and sold to the European. It seems that during the 1720s, neither the foe or Phoebe, nor the Mandinga sold their own people or allow others to sell them. Wow. I'm going to read that again. The most important kingdom of Senegambia maintained a tight control over which people could be enslaved and sold to European. And we're going back on his, it's talking about this area here, right here. And it's proof here that there were Jewish colonies, Judea, paganism, they were practicing probably paganism, I guess. And then you have the Dahomies down here, and traces of um, there's Jewish traces here, and that this little paragraph here I can't read it because some of the words are kind of hidden crossover with the map, so I'm not going to try to attempt to read that. But it is pointing to traces of Jewish traces here, right here. It says here, up in here, Jewish traces. Then here's here, Dahomey, right above the Gold Coast, Ivory Coast, and Slave Coast. Slave Coast here. They have here right above the Slave Coast, Benin, Ephraim, Levi City. Right, let's see, Benin, Ephraim, and then Levi City here, Benin, Ephraim, Gold Coast, Ivory Coast, Slave Coast. Wow, just wow, wow, wow. I think it's down here says Sudan, but I just can't read that. It's unfortunate, but it's just hard to read the whole thing because some of it's blanked out with the map lining of the map. Okay, so it goes on to say that it says it seems that during the 1720s, neither the Foul, Foul, or the Phoebe, nor the Mandinga sold their own people or allowed others to sell them. It says the Bambara or the Bamana, Bamana enjoy so much protection, enjoy no such protection. These are the Senegambia. So they're saying that these people here, Senegambia, they didn't have no protection, none whatsoever. None whatsoever. This is the Bambara or Banmana enjoyed no such protection during the 1720. The only ones that had that protection was the fowl or Fubies or part of Falanis, who knows, nor the Mendigo sold their own people or allowed others to sell them. But the Bambara or the Banmana enjoyed no such protection during the 1720s. And they were Hebrews from Senegambia. That's who they were. That's why they were able to be sold. So the Africans were selling us to the Europeans. And this book is basically saying this. It says those sent to Louisiana were many captives taken during the war, rising out of the founding and consolidation of the Singu Bambara Empire established by Mamori Kalubali. The Bambara were the preponderant nation among the formative um, contingents of slaves sent to Louisiana, and slaves coming from Senegambia continued to be prominent throughout the 18th century. And then it says, look at figure one, page figure one. Okay, I want to go back over there. Um, Coming from Senegambia continued to be prominent throughout the 18th century. It says linguistic as well as historical evidence has established that the Louisiana Creole language was created by these early slaves and was not imported from the French island. Okay, then it's going on to talk about the identify who the Bambara people. Um, it says in which are the Senegambia here that these people. It says Let me read this right quick. It says, in surviving Louisiana court records involving slaves accused of crime between 1728 and 1752. 18 slaves identified themselves as Bambora on a Sango to as Senegal, which meant Wolof of Louisiana. So they were from, they were also considered the Simgambians, the Barbara. Okay, so that was that book. I want to get to now. It's the other book here. This coming out of Owuda, Oida, Ouidah, The Social History of a West African Slave Port, 1727 to 1892. And you know what? The thing is with this, this book also um, confirmed the information I just read out of the Creole New Orleans book. It's saying the same thing in this book by Ouda, The Social History of a West African Slaving Port, 1727 to 1892. And the same port they mentioned in the Creole book, Judah, is going to mention in this book too. Okay, so let's go to page 1. It says the origin, Ouda before the Dahomean conquest. Before what? Before the Dahomey conquest, right here. They took those Dahomey Jews. It says, although Ouda is the spelling of the town name current nowadays, it occurs in European source between the 17th and 19th century in various other forms in English, most commonly Wida, Whydah. Talking about the name here. Now, I'm sure how many times they changed the name based on the countries that took the people. It says in Dutch they call it Fida, Fida. In French they call it Judah, Juda. And in Portugal they call it Ajuda, Ajuda. All these are attempts to render an indigenous name that would be more correctly written by modern convention as Huda, Hueda, or in a dialect varies to Pita. You see how many times they change our names, y'all? It's like, and every time it was, they change our names to hide us. That's basically what it is. It's just crazy. Now, you know the scripture in Deuteronomy 28 when it says that they were called as bywords? Well, these are bywords because it's not our name. It's a strictly origin. Huda, Hueda, was not the name of the town nowadays called Iuda, but rather of the kingdom to which it name of the town nowadays called Yehuda, but rather the kingdom to which it belongs in the late 17th and early 18th century, whose capital was Savi, a place called Savi, 11 kilometers further north. It says the people of Huda, Huada, belong to the same linguistic group as the Fan of Dahomey. So Judah is what they're saying. Because remember it says in French it's called Judah, in Portuguese it's called Judah, and then in Dutch it's called Fida. And it says on the um, it was 11 kilometers, a place called Savi, 11 kilometers further north. The people of Huda belong to the same linguistic group as the Fan of Dahomey, these very Jews that were found on the coast. Although historically distinct from them, this language family is nowadays generally called by scholar Gibby, God, or formerly commonly Ewe. Now I'm gonna get to that next book called the People of the Ewe. So basically, what they're saying is that the Ewe people, the Dahomey people, and the Huda or Judah are the same people. It says the people of Huda or Judah belong to the same linguistic group as the Fan of Dahomey. Although historically distinct from them, this language family is nowadays generally called by scholars Gibi, but formerly commonly Ewe or Aja, and French colonies using the Jedi. This is some crazy stuff, y'all. And it says, listen to this. It says contemporary sources, the name Huda, Hueda, may have been noted first by Spanish missionaries visiting the kingdom of Alada to the northeast in 1660, who recorded it apparently in the form Jura or Urwa. Certainly, it entered the history record in 1671 as Juda, Juda, when the French first established a trading factory there. In 1727, the Huda or Juda kingdom was conquered by the inland kingdom of Dahomey as a political unit. Thereafter survived only in the form of minor successor states. It says formed by the refugees from Dahomey conquest. It's on the western shore of the lake Ahimi, about 20 kilometers west of Auda. This relocated kingdom being distinguished as Huda Border, Hueda/Henji, Henja, Huda on Lake Hen. However, the name Huda, in its various European misspelling, no, there was no misspelling. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were hiding the people is what they were doing. Continue to be applied to the coastal. However, again, read it again. However, the same Huda or Hueda in its various European misspelling continue to be applied to the coastal town now subject to Dahomey. It reads again. And again, they were taken Jews, they were taken Israelites, they were taken God's chosen people from this area. And the Africans of that country in those areas was helping them sell our people, but they would not sell theirs. They wasn't selling their own people. Proof right here. I read it earlier. Um, However, the name Yehuda in its various European misspelling continued to be applied to the coastal town, now subject to Dahomey. In the present work, to avoid confusion, the form Yehuda is used only to reference to the pre-1727 kingdom, and after 1727 to the successor kingdom in exile established to the west, while the modern form Yehuda is used of the town. And I can go on and on how they keep changing the name back and forth and so forth. But that was out of that particular out of the book. This is a different book. This book was out of Ayuda, The Social History of a West African Slave Port. And the one before that was Creole New Orleans. And this is history of the slave trade. The names of the tribes they took and so forth. Now I'm going to go just real short here because I spoke about the Edward people. I'm going to read this and go back to the book, The Social History of a West African Slave Port, Hauda. And then I'm going to go to the book called The Ewe People, The Study of the Ewe People in Burma, Togo. It says here, real briefly, in the Hauda book, it says, the people of Huda, or Hueda, or Judah, belong to the same linguistic group as the Fan, or the Dahomey. Although historically distinct from them, this language family is nowadays, now they call them today. See how they keep changing our names? First it was Huda, Dahomey, Fan. Now it's talking about generally called by scholars. So nowadays they're generally called by scholars as Gebi, but formerly commonly Ewe or Aja. It says Aja. It says and we're talking about Ewe people, same people really. And in French colony, uses Daji. It says the contemporary source, the name Huda or Judah, may have been noted first by Spanish missionaries visiting in the kingdom of Alada. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to the Ewe people, the study of the Ewe people in Gurma, Togo. It says the Ewe ethnic group. This is position, boundaries, and political affiliation of the Ewe people. The Ewe people, or the Ewe ethnic group, settled on the slave coast of West Africa. Here we go again. This is where the Ewe people, right here, slave coast. God, boy, this is they boy, did they really think they're gonna get away with hiding this all this time? It says the Ewe ethnic group settled on the slave coast of West Africa 3 to 4 centuries ago from the northeast and settled between the Mono and the Vulcan. The Atlantic Ocean washes the southern border of the territory, which stretches to about 7 degrees on the western border boundary, while its eastern boundary reaches about to 8% latitude. I'm hearing a sound around here. It says the eastern neighbors of the Edward are their tribal relatives who live in Dahomey. So the eastern neighbors of the Edward or their tribal relatives who live in Dahomey. So we're the same people. This is Dahomey right here. And it says that the Edward people live on the coastline, the river, I mean. It says the eastern neighbors of the Edward are their tribal relatives who live in Dahomey. So they're the same people up in here. And whether they were these people, Benin, Ephraim, Levi, Jewish trace all here, they're saying that the people, the same Edward people was in the same area of the Dahomies, and that was on the slave coast line, and are only separated from them by the river Mono. I remember seeing that in this other book, but I'm not going to try to go back and look for it. And I remember seeing the Volta River. The Volta River is the natural western boundary between the Dangminskas and the Twist, the northern boundary of the district of, we're talking about the districts, the Cambindo, the Camdo, the Alavanto, the Fadam, the Dayi, and the Keepli form the northern boundary of their settlement in Keepli. The boundary takes a sharp course northward, leaving out the district. We're just talking about the area where they're living, where they were settling. Now I'm gonna read this last part. It says, it only did like the introduction on this. It says the two colonial master, England and Germany, have shared their airway land property. They took these people land. They gave them tribal names, and then they called the land theirs. Talking about the England and the Germanys. So these were the same people going over here in this area here, Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and the Slave Coast, taking these people from Dahomey, people from Benin, these colonies, the Levite cities there. This is Nigeria. See, right up here, Nigeria. They went on over. Here's Cameroon, St. Thomas, Guinea. I think St. Thomas is Guinea. Gambo, Gambo, Gamboon. I remember seeing this Kambenda survivors, and these was all Jewish African. It's called the Logo Coast. So here's other African Jewish tribes in here. This is where they went, you all. This is where they went. They went all over this place. And Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and the Slave Coast. And there were actually Jewish colonies in these areas. So that means that they knew exactly who they were going for, and they knew where they were. Now, here in the book, The Airway People, it says it called the Airway Land property. So I wonder if it changed from Airway Land or Airway Land to Negro Land. I thought about that after. I would have to do research on that, but I'm thinking that's probably what happened, because they kept changing the areas. You see how they kept changing Judah, Wuda, Dajida, Iuda, and all that crazy stuff. It's like back and forth, and all depending on the country that was taking the people. That's what they would I guess they would name that area, the post. So I guess they had a Portuguese post, a French post, a Dutch post, and each one of the posts, it was it was it was the same name, but they kept switching it around and changing it, just like they do today. They call us what? When they first brought us here, they call us Negroes. No, they call us slaves. Then they call us Hebos. Then they call us Negroes. Then they call us black. Then they call us African American. Then name us after two continents: Afro American, African, and American. How can you be two continent? Name two continents. But that's just to keep us confused because their intent was to keep us for slave forever, basically. But anyway, you all, I thought I would share that because I was just looking at my books and I kept saying, wait a minute, let me go back and look at the map. And sure enough, they knew where they were taking us. They knew it. They knew. This Gail, Gogo, like I say, Lam Lam here, Jewish Kingdom and Ganata or Ghana. See notes at the end of the sheet. Um, there's a little paragraph about the Ghana. And then you have the Kingdom of Gamura. Okay. Merida. Mauritania. Mauritania. The Sahara Desert here. And then you have other names of tribes up here. But I was focused on the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast, and the Slave Coast, which is around Dahomey, Nigeria, um, Sierra Leone, Senegambia, Lam Lam, Timbuktu here. But this is where again, this is where they came to get us. Ivory Coast, Gold Coast, and Slavery Coast, and in this area, it talks about the Dahomey, the Gambias. Oh, wow, they knew. They knew exactly who they were getting. So anyway, you all, I thought I would share that with you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't go too fast. I was excited about finding this information and came together in my head. So I just try to share it as clear as possible. But you all have a blessed evening. I hope you got something out of this little finding that I found, or really knowledge and facts because I have the books to prove it. So anyway, you all, shalom and have a blessed evening.